Hey everyone, and welcome to Trinity Church's Bible in a Year podcast. My name is Pastor Mike, and today I'm excited to welcome back to the podcast our Trinity Children and Family Minister, Brittany Friesen. Say hello to everybody.
Hey everybody.
So we have been reading the Bible in a year, which is kind of this crazy thing that we are doing as an entire church. And so, Brittany, can you remind us briefly why we're doing this?
Yeah, so Trinity's theme this year is alive and active, which comes from Hebrews 4:12, where it says the word of God is alive and active. It is sharper than any double-edged sword, piercing through both soul and spirit. The word of God judges the thoughts and actions of the heart. In trusting that God's word is indeed alive and active, we as a whole church are on a crazy journey to read that entire Bible.
Yeah.
We believe that by reading the Bible daily, these words have the power to pierce our hearts and get us to reflect on God's word.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the reasons that we are here is to help provide context behind the text and then also to unpack passages that might be confusing or strange. Today we are focused on the start of the book of Proverbs, which is the second of three books we refer to as the wisdom literature. And we'll break down the first 13 chapters today, but before we get there, I'd love for us to continue to get to know Brittany. And so, Brittany, it has been crazy hot around here. I'm wondering, do you and your family embrace the summer heat, or do you guys like try to beat it? Are you like a more like backyard barbecue and trips to the pool type of people, or hide in the basement with the AC on?
Well, we last year were finally able to get into Papillion pool, which is it's pretty hard to get in there. We were on the wait list for like 4 years.
Wait, what?
So we have been embracing the time at the pool this summer.
Is that a Nebraska thing?
It's
like being on a wait list for outdoor pools?
I guess. I don't know.
Man.
It's a Papillion pool thing, I think.
Okay.
But we love it, and it's a great time. And
So
I think
now
there's a
you're
lot
just
of Trinity people that actually belong there, too. We run into people all the time, so it's kind of
So
fun.
now you're just getting as much use out of that membership because you're like, we waited 4 years for this.
We waited 4 years. My child has almost outgrown the pool. But yeah, so we spend a lot of time at the pool. We do a lot of outdoor, just like hanging out. We like to go to Louisville to the beach from time to time, which we haven't done yet this summer. We need to get out there. So
Nice. Well, you had mentioned to me before that you had spent a summer in college working at a Bible camp. And so I'm wondering, what was one of your favorite memories from your camp days? And what was one of the things that you'll never forget about God from working at Bible camp?
Yeah, so I worked at Lutheran Ranches of the Rockies out in Fort Collins, and it was absolutely gorgeous out there. And one of the most memorable things was a friend and I on a weekend, we went for a hike up in the mountains by ourselves, had no clue where we were going, and we stumbled across this gorgeous lake and just really experienced God there. It was gorgeous, just the magnitude of everything around us and God's creation. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah,
So.
it's pretty stunning, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, awesome. And again, just so glad to have you with us. And so let's get into our readings for today. So our readings this week cover the first 13 chapters of the book of Proverbs. And like I mentioned before, Proverbs is among three books in this library that we call the Bible that we categorize as the wisdom literature, alongside Job, which we just finished, and Ecclesiastes. And so a little bit of background on Proverbs. The majority of the book, but not the entirety, was penned in the 10th century BC by King Solomon, who was renowned for his wisdom. And the first 7 chapters follow a motif of a father trying to pass on sage advice to his son. Then there are these 2 chapters where wisdom itself is personified as a woman and her virtues are extolled. And even though there's like this interlaced throughout, there are 2 chapters where it's like all about Lady Wisdom. And then for the next 12 chapters or so, we are given the literal Proverbs. And so Proverbs themselves are meant to be wise sayings that are in the style of a poetic couplet. And it is often a comparison of saying a wise person does this, a foolish person does that, a wealthy person does this, a poor person does this, somebody who is good does this, somebody who is wicked does this. And that is what essentially what boils down, that poetic couplet with wise advice comparing and contrasting two different things is essentially what a proverb is, and that is what this book is named after. So, Brittany, do you want to help give us a summary of the first 13 chapters?
Sure. So here's kind of how everything plays out. Like you said, it starts by the author identifying himself, which is King Solomon,
Yeah.
and shares the purpose of the book, which is to share wisdom with his son. Then in chapter 1, verse 7, we get the main thesis of all the Proverbs, which is fear of the Lord is foundation of true knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline.
Yeah.
He then launches into talking about the importance of keeping the right company and not associating with those who want to plot wickedness, especially murder.
Yeah, especially murder.
That's pretty wicked.
Yep.
In chapter 2, we hear that the Lord is one who grants wisdom and that it is a hidden treasure that we should seek more fervently than we would for even like precious metals, like silver or gold.
Don't seek silver, but seek wisdom like you would like hunt for treasure.
Right. In chapter 3, we hear about how trust in God is another pillar of wisdom. One of the most famous verses in the Bible comes from this passage, which says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take," which actually reminds me of a camp song. Do you know that?
Which
Do you
one?
know that? The Trust in the Lord. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding.
I may have heard it, but like it wasn't in our like main camp rotation.
And he will keep your path straight.
You guys didn't know that this was a song and dance podcast?
No.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
This is one of the more famous verses from the whole Bible, but I think this is really great because, like trusting in God with all of our heart, that is the beginning of wisdom. And so often we as human beings, like we want to trust our own wisdom and our own guidance. And yet this one is like, no. Trust the Lord with all your heart, seek his will. And, when you're in a place where you don't know which way to go, or you're struggling to stay on the right path, like God will keep you on the right path. Mm-hmm. And so, I really love this verse. Yeah. So, all right. But I digress. What else? What else is in there?
Chapter 4, we hear about what it takes to develop good judgment. Don't do what the wicked do, or let yourself think like the wicked do.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating that the advice is not only to refrain from doing what's evil, but to also reject the logic of people who are doing wrong.
Yeah. Right.
So, yeah.
I do find that fascinating because it's like, don't even think like a wicked person would think, and then you'll be good.
Yeah.
That just like reject the premise of their logic, and that will help you refrain from being tempted into doing what they're doing.
Sometimes easier said than done, though, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Sometimes that logic you can be like, well, you got a fair point there.
Yeah.
But yeah. So what else?
So in chapters 5 through 7, Solomon spends a lot of time advising his son to beware of immoral women and be fully devoted to your wife. Don't be lured by prostitutes. Don't be seduced by someone else's wife. Beware of flattery from those who are promiscuous. The list goes on and on.
Yeah, and this feels contextually a little hypocritical, right? Like, if we know that Solomon is the author of the Proverbs, we remember from other books that we've already read as we've been doing this journey, that women was like one of Solomon's like greatest weaknesses. That clearly like Solomon struggles with his own advice here, as he ends up taking 700 wives and 300 concubines during his time as king, many of whom tempt him into worshiping and honoring other gods. And so, maybe there is some distinction here between prostitutes and concubines, and this is my wife because I married her, but I can have lots of wives. But man, it certainly it feels weird, doesn't it?
It does. Honestly, 700 wives kind of sounds like a lot. Honestly, I know how needy I am.
I don't even know 700 people. But
I know. Honestly, I can be kind of needy, though. I can't imagine having 700 wives. So.
Solomon, stay busy, man.
Yeah.
All right, so that was Yeah, those were chapters 5 through 7. What about 8 and 9?
So in 8 and 9, we get wisdom personified as a righteous woman, someone whose treasures are better than silver or gold, kind of like we talked about.
Yeah.
Someone who builds their house on a firm foundation, and someone whose judgment has the power to make great kings and rulers. Yeah. Then in chapters 10 through 13, we get the classic Proverbs. So it's hard to even summarize them because there's just a lot of different.
Yeah, they really kind of bounce around between topics, right?
Yeah. But some of the recurring themes are habits of the wealthy and poor, nature of honesty, the difference between wise men and fools, and controlling what you say and don't say.
Yeah, there's a lot of imagery about wisdom being knowing what to say and when to say it, right? And there's a bunch of imagery around, from your lips or on the lips of fools or from your mouth, comes the things from your heart. And so, yeah, it really at this point feels like once we get from chapter 10 onwards, it feels like coins in a piggy bank almost. Like it's all valuable, but there really isn't any organization between what's a penny and what's a nickel, dimes and quarters, all of that. But there's still things that are very much worth remembering. And so I'm curious, that kind of covers the first 13 chapters, but I'm wondering, did you have any specific Proverbs that you really loved and you want to highlight for those who are listening today?
Yeah, so my favorite one is Proverbs 10:12. Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all offenses. So it tells you to make love your top priority, right? And keep loving each other even when it's tough, because real love has power to forgive and heal and hold relationships together even when people screw up. So
yeah, definitely. One of the ones that I really loved is from Proverbs 10:16, which is the wages of righteousness is life, but the earnings of the wicked are sin and death. Or sometimes it's translated, the wages of sin is death. And one of the things that I like about this is the second half of this proverb is quoted by Paul in the book of Romans, talking about why we need Jesus. That what we earn from our lives that are fully corrupt and wicked and messy and broken is that when we sin, what we earn from that is death. And yet Jesus saves us from the penalty of those earnings. And in some ways, imparts his righteousness onto us, which I think is really cool. Because again, we talk about on this podcast how all of this leads to Jesus, and I think sometimes the Proverbs especially can be really hard to connect to Jesus. There's not always a direct line. I also think that not only are there just some really cool Proverbs, but there's also some ones that are kind of funny too, right?
Right, yeah.
Do you remember Proverbs 10:10?
Yeah.
Do you want to read it for us?
Yeah, whoever winks maliciously causes grief, and a chattering fool comes to ruin.
I'm just trying to imagine, how can you wink maliciously?
I know, I want to know how to do that.
I don't ever feel intimidating when I wink.
No.
I always feel a little bit silly.
A little silly, yeah.
And so I think that one's funny. I also think Proverbs 11:1 is kind of funny, where the Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favor with him. I think that this is kind of funny in just imagining God as an accountant who is just let us make sure that these scales are well balanced, and if you have dishonest scales, I'm going to wing a figure at you. Because I think it's interesting, sometimes in our culture, we downplay what I would consider economic justice, that God cares about the way that we do commerce with each other, and that we do it with integrity, that how we borrow or buy or lend or do business, that is reflective of our personalities and our righteousness. And that's still a really big thing in Middle Eastern cultures today. But us in the West, we're like, whatever. Like,
I'll just pay whatever.
It's,
Yeah.
try to get the most money you can out of people, like, to maximize profit.
Yeah.
And God's like, yeah, don't be dishonest when you're doing business. And so I think that's fascinating.
That actually reminds me when we went to Sierra Leone a couple of years ago. We were in the marketplace and they were haggling, like they haggle for everything in the marketplace. And there was a guy that was haggling with us, and he was bumping the price up really, really high. And there were a lot of people around that got really upset with him and could tell that because of our lighter skin that he was taking advantage of us, and a lot of the other people around got upset with him, and it was interesting that like there were people around to hold him accountable. And
I was in a marketplace in Jordan that I took a group to the Holy Land, and we visited Jordan because it's right next to Israel. And while we were there, we had a similar thing where this merchant had pulled one of the young women in our group like inside his tent and like put a hat on her head and was trying to get her boyfriend then to pay for the hat that he had like put on her head. And like it was interesting that the other people at the marketplace were like, dude, this is not cool, like this is dishonest business. And like eventually ended up helping us like extricate her from that situation. So yeah, other cultures, they are, I think, more sensitive to this than we are.
Yeah,
and
for
so
sure.
I also think Proverbs 13:25 is kind of funny. The righteous eat to their heart's content, but the stomach of the wicked goes hungry. I don't know if that's meant to be like metaphorical or literal, or I don't know. How do you interpret it?
I don't know it seems kind of backwards a little bit. Like the righteous eat to their heart's content, but the stomach of the wicked, like the wicked, you would think would be the ones
like gluttonous, right?
Yeah, gluttonous. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Or maybe it's just to say that like the righteous feel satisfied.
Are more easily satisfied than
where the wicked are always hungering for something else. Like if it's metaphorical, it could be literal, and then it's just like, well, great, when I have a full belly, I'm righteous. So these are fun, but I'm wondering how many of these proverbs felt timeless to you, and how many of them felt confusing or dated?
I don't know, like there were a lot of very familiar verses in there. You hear bits of songs or bits of, I don't know, like camp songs and in there, and that was very familiar, and it was comforting to like hear those things. But some of them, like especially when we're talking about women and those kinds of things, it felt a little dated.
Yeah, so I'm actually really curious about that, especially from your perspective, reading this as a woman and as a mom. Like this is a book of advice from a dad to his son, and feels like there's this weird dichotomy where wisdom herself is a woman, which is a good thing. But then Solomon spends a lot of time bashing women as being promiscuous, flirtatious, deceitful, unfaithful, money hungry with bad motivations. Like, how did that sit with you?
If I'm being completely honest, I didn't really read a whole lot into it. I was still able to take, I don't know, maybe it's my 21st or whatever century, my modern day perspective, where I wasn't really reading it as a son. I mean, I know that that's what it was, but I wasn't really reading it as a son or a father talking to his son, but I was taking some of this advice too, like, I still need to love the way that, God calls us to love, and, different things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah. And you're like, well, this doesn't apply to me.
Yeah.
So he ain't talking about me, so we're
right.
good.
And the part about looking at, promiscuously at women, that doesn't really apply to me. So I just kind of read past that part.
So one of the places that I find tension in here between Solomon's advice and Jesus's advice is that Solomon advises people to stay away from wicked people, and yet so often we are confronted with Jesus' example of eating with people that everybody else thinks are wicked, whether that's tax collectors or people who are coming out of prostitution, Samaritans, etc., people who have been labeled wicked by the rest of society. Jesus seems to have a deep heart for them. And so I just wonder, like, how do you feel like we navigate our call to refrain from being peer pressured into doing what is wrong, like Solomon advises in the Proverbs, versus showing grace for people who are messy and far from God, like Jesus?
I think it's doing just that. It's knowing that, Solomon says not to, fall into those habits, but to love them like Jesus calls us to, and, have compassion and understanding, but don't do that.
Yeah.
So.
And maybe there's a little bit of knowing your own heart to it and knowing yourself.
Yeah.
Of if you are a person that temptation is hard for you to avoid, then maybe you lean more towards Solomon's end and you say, like, hey, I can't be in this situation where people are doing stuff that's against God, because I know that I'm probably going to want to follow the crowd in this situation.
Yeah.
But if you're in a place where you feel secure in your faith and who you are, then especially as Jesus, like, Jesus is not, he dealt with the devil. Like, he's not going to be tempted by tax collectors, right? And so, he's able to put himself in situations where he's able to radically love people and show them God's grace. Even though the people in his day who were probably taking Solomon's advice literally were like, we should shun them and stay away from them. And they, I think because in some ways, because of the Proverbs, they assume that Jesus is wicked because he's hanging out with other people that they deem wicked, right?
But, Jesus is here to turn the tables, right? Like, he's there to show them that that's not necessarily correct, right?
Yeah. And there certainly is, I think, some tension in here between writing people off as wicked or evil, and Jesus gives us more nuance to that, to say, like, no, it's not that people aren't sinners and they don't struggle with sin, but being able to look beyond that to see people as children of God, even the people who, are doing bad stuff. And so, I just find that really interesting. Was there anything else that, like, really stood out to you, or questions that you had as we were reading?
I don't think so. I really liked that wisdom is portrayed as a woman.
Yeah.
That part just really stood out to me. It's like, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like, I could just read it. So from the top of Proverbs 8, it says, listen as wisdom calls out. Hear as understanding raises her voice. On the hilltop along the road, she takes her stand at the crossroads. By the gates at the entrance to the town, on the road leading in, she cries aloud, I call to all of you. I raise my voice to all people. You simple people, use good judgment. You foolish people, show some understanding. Listen to me, for I have important things to tell you, and everything I say is right. I think that's really, it's really beautiful.
Yeah, it is, for sure.
Well, cool. Well, with that, we'll wrap up today's episode. So thank you, Brittany, for joining us again. And for those of you guys that are listening online, remember to leave your questions and comments with us. If you do, we'll draw from commentators to win a free drink at the cafe. And next time when we're back, we will cover more Proverbs. So until then, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon. Bye now.